To start off Unit 10, which will be human impacts on the environment, we need to discuss how humans have interacted with their environment through time. Now, through the past, since our evolutionary origins, several hundred million years ago, humans have been changing their environment and changing the modes by which they interact with their environment. So we're going to take a look at how these technologies have changed over time and their influence on the overall number of humans that live on the planet or lived on the planet at some point in the past. So up until about 500 years ago, the human population was relatively stable. It's characterized by response to some limiting factors. Now these are mostly going to be density-dependent limiting factors that we're going to discuss. Remember, diseases and their prevalence increase with increases in population, as well as access to food and other resources like clean water, and shelter, etc. Now, the next big factor was actual survival rate. And up until very recently, within the last 500 years, humans had about a 50% survival rate of offspring. And so that's a really high mortality rate. That's basically meaning, in order for a couple to have 2 children grow to adulthood, they'd actually have to have 4 children. And so during this time frame, we didn't see very much growth, and humans followed one of 2 main modes of life. And so when we look at that first one, that's going to be hunter-gatherer lifestyle, which is your first vocab term. So what are hunter-gatherers? Hunter-gatherers are characterized by small migratory bands of people. We're usually going to be talking about family groups or extended family groups, maybe on the order of like 10 to 30 individuals. And these groups hunted for game animals. So you think about American Indians, tribes in Papua New Guinea, etc. And then they also foraged for their vegetables. So they spent a lot of their time looking through the environment and trying to access seeds and fruits and vegetables. The problem or the challenge with this lifestyle is that there's no food storage. The people are moving periodically several times throughout the year to find those food resources, and so it's very much a day-to-day life. When they would wake up in the morning, they wouldn't know necessarily where their food was coming from for that day. And hunter-gatherers tend to follow what we call a subsistence pattern of lifestyle. And so subsistence is this idea that you place very few demands on your environment. Hunter-gatherers harvest food, whether plants or animals, at low levels, and because they move on, they never really hunt out an area. So they wouldn't hunt out all of the deer in an area or pick all of the berries in an area, because they would only be in an area for a short time, maybe half a season to a season, then they'd move on. Some of the effects on the environment that hunter-gatherers had, we have evidence that they sustained prairie ecosystems by purposely setting wildfires, whether that be for hunting. So they set fires to herd animals into sort of kill zones where they could hunt them. We have evidence that they built small dams to corral fish, like on salmon runs, so they could catch fish. It looks like they were responsible for transporting what we call some non-native species. So things like dogs were known to be associated with hunter-gatherers, as well as maybe moving some food from area to area. So they'd carry, grains from one area to another and leave them behind. And so you'd see some growth maybe of things that weren't necessarily native to an area. Very, very strongly limited population here by food availability. During the rough seasons, winter, etc., their lack of food resources really kept their population low. And so when we examine our human population graph here, which remember shows that exponential growth curve, hunter-gatherers were the main mode of life from basically most of history. So from about 8,000 years BC, before Common Era, so that's actually about 10,000 years ago, to right around 4 or 3,000 years before Common Era. So you're looking at 5 to 6,000 years ago. Pretty much the entire human race followed a hunter-gatherer lifestyle. And today we can still find, even in modern times, so here, people that are living in that hunter-gatherer lifestyle. These are going to be tribes in the Amazon and Papua New Guinea, as well as some sort of New Age people that are attempting to live off of the land. The other main lifestyle then that overlapped with the hunter-gatherers is the agricultural lifestyle. And while there's still agriculture happening today, when we're referring to this, it's the majority of the human race that was undergoing agriculture, or agriculture and hunter-gathering. And so what we see is a big shift about 6,000 years ago from mainly hunter-gatherer societies over to agricultural societies. For those of you that maybe don't realize, agriculture, that's the practice of growing, breeding, and tending to plants or animals. That's domesticated plants or animals for consumption. And so what agriculture does is it allows humans to produce their own food sources. Okay? And what that really kicks up is the dependability of food. They basically have the ability to plan ahead to ensure that when they wake up in the morning, they will have something to eat. Once agriculture kicks in, humans really started to grow as far as the size of the groups that they were living in. We're starting to see what you would call larger settlements. So you might call it a town, but we're ranging way up above that, 30-ish family group size, all the way up to possibly maybe even 1,000 individuals living in an area, but probably not quite that large. Now, the effects on the environment that agriculture has, obviously, it's going to increase the growth rate a little bit. So when we look at the graph, the overall population is going to rise some. That's because you're addressing that limiting factor of food availability. We do see that there has been some selective breeding going on by these agricultural societies. So they're artificially selecting, right, the desirable traits in their crops and animals. And so they're artificially influencing the process and development of new breeds, etc. We do see that they were cutting down forests or burning forests for the creation of farmland, and then developing technologies like plowing. And as they created farmland, we associate soil and water degradation, so increase in runoff and things like that. So here's just a couple of pictures. We have, tapestries and evidence of, agriculture through ancient Egypt, Mesopotamia, etc. And then here's a modern picture of a farmer probably in India using oxen to plow for a rice paddy. Notice the overlap in technologies here. It's the same yoke setup on the oxen, the same plow, etc. So these technologies that worked in the past are still in use today. And then here's a really interesting piece of agricultural environment alteration. This is Machu Picchu in Peru. Hope I'm spelling this right. And what this is Incan society. And what they did is they lived on the mountaintops in the Andes Mountains, which doesn't have a good gradient for growing crops. So they actually built walls all along their towns, and this created flat areas. And so these, in the past, during the time of the civilization, would have been full of crops. This entire area would have been plowed and cultivated for food like corn, etc. And then you have sort of the living quarters here and here on top of this mountain. And so this was an agricultural-only society. And so when we're looking at agriculture, we see, a slight increase. We're increasing the population in this range from the hunter-gatherer, which is over here, HG to the agriculture that's over there, right? And agriculture actually continued very much into this range, want to be clear, as the primary mode of life for most people on Earth. The agricultural lifestyle really ended at the point of the Industrial Revolution. This happened, of course, mainly got its start in the United States and Great Britain. That happened between the 18 and the 1900s. What the Industrial Revolution did was it shifted our energy sources from animal and water over to fossil fuels. So we're talking about coal power here, steam power in the beginning, all right, and factories that were operating on these things. This coal and steam power was used to mass produce goods. So instead of each farmer making their own plow, etc., on their own farm, the farmers are going and they're trading with special tradesmen. People are getting specialized jobs to mass produce materials and goods and services for others in the environment. And so what this did is it increased artificial substances in the environment. It increased the amount of transport that we're seeing. And so the Industrial Revolution is really, we saw a big increase in agriculture, okay? We saw a big increase in nutrition, so people are eating better food, sanitation, better access to clean water, and an increase in medical care, where they have more access to medicine. The death rate of children dropped, and so we see what's called urban development. People move to cities to become specialized and have those ideal jobs, and we saw what's called industrial growth, which is an increase in the production rate. So how quick you can produce something, in transport, how quickly you can move something, and consumption, how much of a particular substance is used. Along with that, we see all the negatives that are associated with industrial growth, pollution, okay, growth of habitat destruction, growth of cities, growth of the population. And so it's really, some people would question whether the quality of life increased or not during this time frame. Okay, so here's just some pictures of the Industrial Revolution. We have, spinning gens and cotton wheels, and this time is really associated with child labor at factories, and lots of factories that are belt-driven through steam power, etc. All right, and this is, what we're starting to see today: mass production of homes, the superhighways. This is, I think, Beijing at night, and so we're really, really growing as a human population, becoming packed into cities and accessing our resources. And so this is basically the start of the Industrial Revolution, right in this range, and the growth that's occurred on up from that point is really when we entered that exponential shift. Now, the Industrial Revolution wasn't all that led to our current status or our current population. In the 1950s, we had what was called the Green Revolution, which is basically new farming practices. Okay, these increase the production, aka green, of food crops. All right, the Green Revolution really relies on what's called a monoculture. That's a large field planted with a single crop. You guys have seen this driving down the road, huge cornfields, etc. What that allows the farmer to do is just focus on one type of crop so that he can be more efficient, okay? Usually using irrigation and fertilization and pesticides, all of which are harmful to the environment, to support growing those large food crops and those monocultures. This allowed, in a very short number of years, we're talking about 5 to 15 years, worldwide food production to double in a very short period of time. Okay, so here's where the Green Revolution kicks in. It's that 3 to 6 billion population size jump. What we have done with that Green Revolution is really remove the limiting factors on the environment. Okay, and so within the last 2 years, the human population is estimated to have passed 7 billion. We're currently at about 7.16 billion. Okay, we're seeing an increase in life expectancy, so people are living longer. We're seeing an increase in fertility rate. They're having more children successfully, and because of that, more people means we need more food and more natural resources. And so compared to about 300 years ago, we have 10 times as many people on Earth, and we're increasing the growth rate, we're increasing the pollution, and we're increasing our pressure on the environment.